Alright, here we go with our final set of notes in the Evolution in Animals unit. This one on chordates, which is basically just a fancy term for vertebrates or things with a spine. So mostly going to be talking about fish, but we'll talk a little bit about some other mammals and other land vertebrates as well. So first of all, their vital characteristics, just like you would expect because of all the things that they are more advanced than. We're working our way up. These guys have bilateral symmetry, 3 tissue layers. Are they segmented? Of course they're segmented. Why wouldn't they be? They do have a true body cavity. And then what's different about these guys is they have a backbone made of bone or cartilage that protects a dorsal nerve cord. So that's different here. A dorsal nerve cord. Everything else has had a ventral nerve cord up till now. But now that we have a spine along the back, which helps us with movement, that's a really good place to keep our nerve cord because it's protected. The main representative of chordates in the ocean, of course, are the fish. And the fish come in 3 main classes. The first one is class Agnatha, which is a pretty limited class of fish. It really has only 2 members, lamprey and hagfish. These guys are very, very, very primitive. They are among some of the oldest animals on Earth. And then we have class Chondriichthyes, which are sharks, skates, and rays. These guys here, things that have a skeleton made out of cartilage. And then Osteichthyes, which are your bony fish. So ichthyes is Greek for fish. Chondra means cartilage. Oste means bone. Think of like osteoporosis is a disease of your bones when your bones are too thin. So those are the 3 groups that we're going to be talking about in this unit. So we'll start off with the Chondriichthyes. These guys have that skeleton made of cartilage, which is a lightweight protein. It's a lot softer than bone, but it's also a lot more lightweight. They also have placoid scales, which are pictured over here to help reduce drag. It's kind of interesting. People have been borrowing from nature in placoid scales for a while. A couple of years ago, they had swimsuits in the Olympics that were modeled after placoid scales that made the athletes go through the water a little bit faster. And they also have marine paint, so paint like on the bottom of ships' hulls that is supposed to mimic a placoid scale to help them move through the water a little bit faster. These guys, Chondriichthyes, are also characterized by having a very, very large liver. And the reason they have a very large liver is because it produces a lot of oil, and oil is less dense than water, so this is what helps regulate their buoyancy, or in a little bit more simple terms, their floatiness, which of course is not really a real term. And then finally, most of the Chondriichthyes also have internal fertilization, so they do actually have their young inside the womb for some period of time. Osteichthyes have some similarities and some differences to the Chondriichthyes. For one, they have their skeletal systems made out of bone instead of cartilage, which is why the major difference. And to regulate their buoyancy, instead of having massive livers producing oil, they have what's called a swim bladder, or sometimes it's also called an air bladder. And it's kind of like with you guys, if you take in a deep breath of air, you float. If you let it all out, you sink. Same thing with Osteichthyes, with bony fish. They have a little pocket of air that can control their buoyancy if they're up or down in the water column. As far as their nervous system goes, their nervous system is starting to get a little bit more advanced. And this is actually seen in some of the Chondriichthyes as well. But you can see their brain over here is starting to be divided up into different sections. So before, other critters we were looking at, like the crayfish, their brain is just kind of like a lump of nerves. Right? There wasn't a whole lot of differentiation. But here we've got a bunch of different areas of the brain. You've got your olfactory bulbs, your cerebellum, your optic tectum, so helping with vision, cerebellum, your medulla, of course the spinal cord. And then if you compare that to the human brain, we have a lot of those same characteristics. Right? Here's our cerebellum with their cerebellum. Their cerebrum. This all through here is our cerebrum. The medulla, like the medulla oblongata, right here, this is the medulla. So obviously not the same as our brain, but you can see you have some sort of division of the organs, making different parts of the brain having more specialized jobs. So they're doing different things, getting a little bit better. And then as far as the reproductive system, it's mostly external, which we call spawning. The bony fish's circulatory system is closed. Same thing with the Chondriichthyes, also closed. They're with veins and arteries, everything's all enclosed. And these guys have 2 chambered heart. So if we look over here in our diagram, we see our two different chambers. We've got the atrium, which just kind of holds blood. Atrium is sort of like a doorway. And then the ventricle that does all the pumping. And you can see this one, the muscle is very, very thick because it's doing all the work. Atrium, the muscle, or the heart wall is not all that thick. It doesn't have to do much. It just pumps the blood from here to here, versus this guy is pumping the blood throughout the whole body. These are the same chambers that we have, although not in the same numbers. We have two ventricles and we have two atria. And then finally, their respiratory system, they of course have gills, which are supported by gill arches, so structures that hold onto those gills help them sometimes filter out food if they like to eat plankton. And they use something called counter-current flow to help increase the levels of oxygen in their blood. And I think this is very interesting because if we look over here at this diagram, what I mean by counter-current flow is the blood and the water flow in opposite directions. And the reason for that is to increase those oxygen levels. So imagine if the blood and the oxygen were flowing in the same direction. Well, oxygen just moves through simple diffusion, so it goes from a high concentration to a low concentration. In this case, the water has a lot of oxygen, 100%. It's going to the blood that's very little, and it's diffusing. All right? Well, when's that going to stop? When you get equilibrium, 50%. Once you get 50%, or once you get 51%, then oxygen is going to start going the other way. Versus if you're going the counterflow, water's flowing this way and blood's flowing this way, you can see you never really reach equilibrium. Equilibrium is not met so that oxygen is always diffusing into the blood. You see here, the blood has like 90% oxygen compared to only 50% over here. And I should say this has nothing to do with the direction they're swimming. It's not like they always have to swim against the flow in a stream or something like that. That doesn't matter. It's just the way that the blood is always moving in their mouth and out their gills. So it's always moving in a ventral to dorsal or cranial to caudal direction, and the blood is flowing the opposite way inside their blood vessels. And then finally, I just want to talk a little bit about the circulatory systems and compare fish to more advanced organisms. The fish have what's called a single loop system. What I mean by single loop is blood leaves the heart and it goes to the gills where it picks up its oxygen, goes to the rest of the body, delivers the oxygen to the organs, and comes back to the heart. Well, the problem with this is the blood is going to slow way down when it goes from these giant blood vessels, think of like I-5 or an interstate, to these roads which are like single paths or like dirt roads. Everything has to slow way, way down. So the blood doesn't speed back up over here. It can only go as fast as it was going when it came out of this slowdown right here. So these guys have a single loop, which is very, very slow blood flow. As opposed to some of the more advanced organisms, you get some differences in that. So for example, an amphibian, these guys have 3 chambers to their heart, and they have what's called a double loop system. So now in the case of the amphibians, blood comes into the heart, into the right atrium, to the right ventricle, and then it gets pumped to the lungs or the gills or whatever it happens to be, depending on the amphibian, and then it comes back to the heart. So this is why we have that second atrium. In this case, we have 1 ventricle, 2 atria. Comes back there and then gets pumped out again, and this time it's going much, much faster. Right? Blood's moving slowly here, moving quickly here. Slow, fast, slow, fast. Those are the 2 different loops. You've got the pulmonocutaneous, so lungs or skin, or the gill circuit, and the systemic going to the entire system. So it's a double loop system, the advantage being that they can pump blood a lot faster. As we move up evolutionarily, reptiles, which would be the next step, these guys are pretty similar to the to the amphibians. They also have a double loop system, so blood's still going to go from the heart to the lungs, back to the heart, throughout the body. In this case, though, these guys have, you can see their ventricle is a little bit more divided. They don't have this septum, this wall here, so the blood's still mixing a little bit. These guys have that division and then a couple different ways to get out. But you see, blood is still not quite totally separated. They have still some blood that's being a little bit mixed. And then when we get to, as they say, the pinnacle of evolution, us mammals, these guys, or we, have a double loop system as well as 4 distinct chambers in our heart. So blood would come in through the right atrium to the right ventricle, and then would go to the lungs. Again, it's going to slow down there, but then it's going to come back to the heart, and it's going to get sped up. And notice there's a total wall there. The red does not mix with the blue at all. The oxygenated blood does not get diluted by the deoxygenated blood, and so total 100% oxygen blood gets pumped to the organs and whatnot, and then comes back that way. So it remains totally separate. So they kind of have the best of both worlds. They have the double loop, which allows faster blood flow. They have four-chambered heart, and the heart is totally divided, so we don't get any mixing of the blood like you see over here. And with that, we are done with all of our notes on chordates as well as the entire unit of evolution in animals.